Ever wonder what the Wild West actually smelled like? Forget those ruggedly handsome cowboys you see in the movies. The reality was, well, a lot grittier and a whole lot smellier. Today, we diving deep into the downright disgusting hygiene habits of the Old West that you were probably too afraid to ask about. So, saddle up because things are about to get real. First up, let's talk about bathing. Or rather, the lack of it. For many folks on the frontier, a full-body bath was a rare luxury. Water was often scarce and had to be hauled by hand from a well or a creek. Then it had to be heated over a fire. This entire process was a major chore. So, how often did they actually bathe? Maybe once a week, if they were lucky and lived in a town with a bathhouse. For pioneers on the trail or cowboys on a long cattle drive, it could be weeks or even months between proper washes. A quick splash of cold water on the face and hands was often the daily routine. The family bathtub, if they had one, was a communal affair. The man of the house went first, followed by the other men, then the women, and finally the children, all in the same murky, lukewarm water. By the time the last person got in, you could only imagine what the water looked like. And soap? It wasn't the fragrant, bubbly stuff we have today. It was usually homemade from lye and animal fat, a harsh concoction that could strip your skin raw. It did the job, but it was far from a pleasant spa experience. Now, let's move on to something we do every day, brushing our teeth. In the 19th century, dental hygiene was practically non-existent for the average person. Toothbrushes were available, but they were often made with coarse board bristles that could damage gums. Many people simply didn't use them. Instead, they might chew on a twig or rub their teeth with a rag and some salt or soot. That's right, soot from the fireplace. As you can imagine, this didn't do much to prevent cavities or gum disease. Toothaches were a common and agonizing problem. And the solution? A trip to the local barber or blacksmith, who also doubled as the town's dentist. Their primary tool wasn't a drill, but a pair of pliers. No anesthetic, no sterile equipment. They just yanked that rotten tooth right out. It is no wonder so many people in old photographs look so grim. They were probably in constant dental pain. Losing all your teeth by middle age was incredibly common. All right, what about laundry day? This was another backbreaking, all-day event. Clothes were made of heavy materials like wool and cotton, and washing them was a serious workout. Women would have to haul water, heat it in a large kettle over an open fire, and then scrub the clothes on a washboard with that harsh lye soap. Then came rinsing and wringing out the heavy, waterlogged garments by hand. Underwear wasn't changed daily. People owned fewer sets of clothes, so they were worn for days, sometimes weeks on end, especially in winter. You just air them out at night and hope for the best. And those iconic cowboy jeans? They were rarely, if ever, washed. The dirt and grime were just considered part of the fabric's character. Imagine wearing the same sweaty, dusty clothes for a month-long cattle drive. The aroma must have been unforgettable. Let's venture into the outhouse. Indoor plumbing was a futuristic dream for most. The outhouse, a small wooden shed with a hole cut into a bench, was the standard. It was usually located a good distance from the house for obvious reasons, the smell, especially in the summer heat. And toilet paper? Not so much. People used whatever was on hand. Corn cobs were a popular choice. Yes, you heard that right. Corn cobs, old newspapers, catalogs like the Sears Roebuck, or even just leaves were also common substitutes. It was a rustic and unsanitary system. Waste would just collect in a pit below, attracting flies and creating a pretty potent health hazard. These conditions were a breeding ground for diseases like cholera and dysentery, which frequently swept through communities with devastating effects. Now, think about the towns themselves. The streets weren't paved. They were dirt, which turned into a thick, gooey mud pit whenever it rained. And what was in that mud? Everything you can imagine. Animal waste was everywhere. Horses were the main mode of transportation, and they left their droppings all over the streets. Add in pigs, chickens, and stray dogs roaming freely, and you have a recipe for a truly foul environment. Trash was simply thrown out the window or into the street. There were no municipal garbage collection services. All of this organic waste would rot in the sun, creating an incredible stench and attracting swarms of flies and rats. The romantic image of strolling down a dusty main street at sunset conveniently leaves out the part where you read. Try not to step in a pile of horse manure or trip over a discarded animal carcass. What about personal grooming? For men, beards and mustaches were very fashionable. But without regular washing, they became perfect traps for dust, food particles, and whatever else was floating around. A cowboy's bandana wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a practical tool to pull up over his nose and mouth to filter out the dust kicked up by the cattle herd, and maybe just maybe to block out some of the smells from his unwashed companions. Women's hair was rarely cut and worn in long, elaborate styles. Washing that much hair was a huge ordeal, so it was often done infrequently. Instead, they would brush it vigorously every night to distribute the natural oils and remove dirt. But things like lice were a constant battle. People would use fine-toothed combs to try and remove the pests and their eggs, a tedious and often losing fight. Medical care was just as primitive. Doctors were few and far between, and their understanding of germs was limited at best. Louis Pasteur's germ theory wasn't widely accepted until the late 1800s. Before that, surgeons operated with unwashed hands and unsterilized instruments. A simple cut could easily become infected and lead to amputation or even death. Sickness was often attributed to bad air or an imbalance of the body's silk humors. Remedies were often based on folklore and included everything from herbal concoctions to questionable patent medicines loaded with alcohol, opium, or cocaine. These cure-alls rarely fixed the underlying problem and often created new ones like addiction. So, if you got sick or injured in the Old West, your chances of a full recovery were pretty slim. So, the next time you watch a Western and see a hero with a clean-shaven face and pearly white teeth, remember the reality. The Wild West was a world of grit, grime, and germs. It was a tough, smelly, and often unsanitary existence that required a level of resilience we can hardly imagine today. Life was hard, and staying clean was one of the hardest parts of it all. It definitely makes you appreciate your hot shower, flush toilet, and minty toothpaste a whole lot more, doesn't it? Thanks for joining us on this grimy journey back in time. If you found this dive into the dirty details of the Old West fascinating, hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more surprising stories from history. Let us know in the comments what other historical myths you want us to bust. See you next time!